everyone, Tanika here. Hope you guys are having an amazing day. So if you're new to my channel, thank you for coming. If you're a returning viewer, thank you so much. As always, I always appreciate you guys. It's never unlooked, so thank you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share because the whole point is to help people. So I wanted to do something a little different this time. I actually want to go into more detail into my story. I feel I've put up enough videos already and you guys are obviously grasp the concept of what's going on here and what I've kind of gone through, but I really wanted to go into detail and now specifically tell my grandma's story and my grandpa's story, obviously not in just one video because there's a whole lot of things that I'd like to cover. Each story is different. My grandma's story is different than my grandpa's story, so I thought I would start with my grandma's because that's kind of where my journey all started and kind of began. So I'm not sure how long this video might be, or I'm not sure how long this is going to take. If it kind of goes lengthy, which I think it might just because it's quite a story, I think I might do this into segments. I might just do like a few separate videos, like part A, part B, part C kind of thing, so that way it's not just one long video, because I know watching one long video gets like boring after a while, so trying to avoid that. So I think I'll start with my grandma, how my journey of being a caregiver began in the sense of my own personal family. Obviously I've been in the medical field before, I've taken care of people. It's not necessarily where my caregiving began in the medical field, but with my own personal family, it was my grandma. So it basically started in 2011. You know, you go for your checkup or whatever. My grandma had gone to the doctor and they had mentioned that she had a nodule on her lung, and they said it was very small, benign, nothing wrong with it. Basically just watch it and that was it. There was nothing they could really do, and they didn't necessarily want to do surgery or anything because it was very close to her heart. So they said, you know what, we're just gonna monitor it and just see how it goes. So from 2011, let's just say fast forward to 2012 is kind of where things started to change. I actually was living in a different city. My grandparents lived in a city called Sun City. I actually lived in Redlands. I was working at Loma Linda Hospital at the time, and I was doing my own thing. And once 2012 came, my grandma started getting sick, so we took her back to the hospital, and we took her back, and they basically said, well, crazy as it is, you know, you have lung cancer. So my grandma had lung cancer, and she had a very rare type of lung cancer that most people don't get, so pretty devastating. And basically right after that, she started chemo. And when chemo started, I was going, because it was Kaiser Riverside. It was somewhat close to where I was, but not really, but it was enough for me to go, and I love my family, so it didn't matter what the drive was, I was gonna go anyway. So I was going with my grandpa to my grandma's chemo, and she was doing chemo for, I'd say maybe, this was probably the beginning of 2012, so I would probably say she did chemo for maybe 4 or 5 months. It was really, really horrible for her. I mean, it was painful, obviously. She was getting the side effects, and she was just, at one point, she just got to it where she said, you know what, I can't take it. Enough is enough. And she didn't want to do chemo anymore. And of course, as her family, we completely support her, and we said, okay, you don't want to do chemo. My family is very religious, and both my grandparents are, and my grandma was as well. So she said, you know what, this is it. God will call me home when he wants me to go home. So my grandma decided to just leave it all up to faith. When she decided to stop chemo, well, actually, no, rewind, I'm sorry. When she first got diagnosed with a lung cancer, they actually told her she only had a couple months to live. So that was pretty crazy. I mean, I was just overwhelmed with emotions. It was really, really scary, thinking, oh my gosh, I only have a couple months with my grandma and that's it. God willing, and thank you, Jesus, we actually ended up getting a whole year with her, a whole year pretty much, you know, by God's grace, and not only just 2 months. So she decided to go off of chemo, and at that point, because of her condition and because it was already, the cancer had already progressed quite far, which was very upsetting because they had told us it was only a lung nodule. So I will talk about all these little back details later. But basically, long story short, the cancer was already progressed so much that there was nothing they could really do at this point. So basically from there, she went on to hospice. So if you don't know what hospice is, it's basically you're at home and you're there to basically spend your last days there, and that's where you will pass. And so that's the basic way to put it for someone who doesn't know what it is or anything like that. She went on to hospice, and she was doing, at this point, by the time she went on to hospice, she was still doing okay. She was still very alert, and she was able to walk and do all kinds of things for herself. So at this point, I decided in my life that I was going to move closer to my grandparents. So my grandparents lived in Sun City. I moved to a city maybe 10 minutes away called Murrieta, which was very close to them. I stayed in a house in Murrieta while my grandma was still okay. I would stop by, I would check on them. I was still working at the hospital, so I was making a really long commute. But then it all happened. It's crazy how in one instant, just like that, things can completely change. So she was doing well, she was great, she was breathing on her own, she wasn't having any complications, and one day she just started having a little bit of trouble breathing. So we're like, okay, obviously we know that's a sign of the lung cancer progressing, obviously. So we called the hospice nurse, they put her on oxygen. She wasn't on a very high liter of oxygen, maybe just 2. And she was doing okay. She was still alert. She was still able to get around and do all the things that she loved to do still. And then reality really hit me and it set in. Basically, I knew my grandma had taken a turn is when basically she almost gave herself the wrong medication. My grandma was diabetic and she would take insulin, but also ahead of time, the hospice nurse had given us morphine, so in case if she did get really bad, we could give it to her. If she was in pain, we can give her the morphine. So one day, and thank you Jesus that I was at my grandma's house, at my grandparents' house at this time, she went to go give her insulin, which she took in the morning and she took at night. She took a certain amount of units. Well, what I noticed was she was actually almost going to give herself morphine. Instead of drawing up the insulin out of the little glass bottle, she actually drew up the morphine. And that's when it really just struck me hard. Oh my gosh, now it's about to really begin. And I knew that at that point her mind was already getting confused and she wasn't going to be able to do a lot for herself much longer. So at that point, that was the turning point for me when I decided to move in with my grandparents at that point, because I knew I would be the main caregiver for my grandma. My grandpa was already older, obviously, and I didn't want him to have to do as much work as possible, except obviously just be there with her if I had to work or something like that, which ended up not happening in that sense, but I will explain that in a minute. So at that point, I made a conscious choice to move in with my grandparents and to be there to take care of my grandma full time. So I left the house I was at and I moved in with my grandparents. So at this point, things started to progress fairly quickly, but it was really weird. Like in certain situations like this, you never know. It was honestly just a waiting game. Like one day she would be okay, the next day she would be down, and it was just basically like a roller coaster. You never knew. There were days where I thought, oh my gosh, this is it. My grandma's gonna die in front of me, and then the next day she would be like, yay, perfectly fine. It's just absolutely crazy. So you just never know, and it's honestly an emotional roller coaster, like a very big emotional roller coaster. So from that point on, I lived with them, and that's when things started to go downhill. My grandma started to basically have more trouble breathing, so we had to updose her oxygen, and pretty much at that point, she would have to take she would have to have the oxygen at the house, but then at this point, it started to get to where she would have to take the oxygen with her wherever she went, like if she went to church or outside. And then it got to the point where we needed a lot of medical supplies. So because she couldn't breathe, we had to have a breathing treatment machine come in. I had to do that for her. Basically, a flood of medical supplies just came into our house. It got really bad where she was having trouble getting in and out of the bed and things like that, obviously because she's sick. So we had a hospital bed put in. So I had the main big bed, and then my grandma's hospital bed was like right here, and we pushed them together so we would be next to each other. I slept in the room with her because I took care of her and I needed to monitor her, because even in the middle of the night she would wake up having chest pains, or she couldn't breathe, or she needed help. So basically that's pretty much the beginning of this story, is how it began. And I kind of want to keep it there because everything that I've said, I would like to do more videos and topics on things like that after this for the next segment. It went from I thought I could work and I thought I could do my daily life and take care of my grandma to absolutely end up not working, completely total care, taking care of my grandma, which is totally fine because I knew I would do this from the very beginning at a young age, and it's what I always wanted to do, is to take care of my family. She just started going downhill. It got to a point where the cancer spread up to her throat and it paralyzed her vocal cords. So at one point, she was basically mute. She couldn't speak, and if she did, it was very soft, which was chaotic because I could understand her, but my grandfather is actually legally deaf if he doesn't have his hearing. Well, he was. How sad, because he just passed already. It's crazy. Those are those kind of moments where it's like, you know, oh, my grandpa, you know, and now he's gone, so I have to say he was legally deaf, but basically without his hearing aid. She would talk, I could hear, but he couldn't hear. So basically it was like I had to be like a mute translator. It was just crazy. It was like super chaotic. It was just so hard, and my grandma would get upset because my grandpa couldn't understand her. My grandpa would get frustrated because he couldn't hear her, and he wanted to communicate with, they wanted to communicate with each other. Then it got to a point where phone calls, I had to answer calls. So it just became like total chaos real quick. And I mean, obviously I took care of things and I handled everything. It's just crazy because we weren't prepared for all of these things to happen so fast. And so basically it got to a point after she lost her voice, then it came to a point where she couldn't swallow anymore. So obviously you swallow, right? You know, you eat your food, drink your drinks. Well, she couldn't do that anymore. Basically anytime that she swallowed or ate food, she would choke. So literally there were moments where she would be choking to death in front of me, and I thought, you know, oh my gosh, this could be the last moment as well. So not only is it a waiting game where it's a roller coaster up and down with their health, but it was also on the side note of, oh my gosh, is she gonna choke to death in front of me as well, which was, oh my gosh, it's the most scariest, excruciating thing to watch someone do that. And we obviously figured out tips and tricks where she would have to put her head down to swallow and things like that, but it was really scary. My grandma's situation obviously I think was way more traumatizing than my grandpa's. All in the same, I'm blessed to have had the opportunity to take care of them. So basically from there, I just became total care. I would try to go to work, but I couldn't because if I left for work, even though my grandma was there, my grandma knew that I had medical experience and she knew I would take care of her the best. So if I tried to leave and go to work, she would basically call me on my cell phone, panicking. The hospice nurse would come to the house and call me and say, Tanika, you know, your grandma's going into respiratory arrest, this and that, you need to come home. And I'm like, hey, I'm trying to work. Like, I have things to do. I have to pay my bills. I'm trying to work. You know, I was trying to juggle it all. And it just got to a point where I ended up having to leave early or call off, which sucks because nobody wants that. And eventually after my grandma passed, I lost my job for that, but I don't regret it at all. Never have, never will. Part of it makes sense because if you call off and you leave early a lot, it makes sense. You're gonna get fired. That's kind of what happened with that. And I want, like I said, I want to leave the story from there. So I will leave it at this. I'm gonna call this part like part 1 because there's so many more details and so many things that this video could probably be like an hour long or more. I don't want that, obviously, so I think I'm gonna call this part 1 and just leave it at that. And basically that's pretty much how my journey started. That's how it began, and that's how this whole YouTube channel came about and my situation in life. It started with my grandma. I kind of want to go into more detail on what I did, emotions, so many things. So basically it's probably be like a 3, 4, 5 part series depending. So I just want to thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed the first part of the series. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. I love you all, and thank you so much. I truly appreciate you guys. Stay posted for the next video of this series. I look forward to speaking to you guys soon. Thanks. Love you guys.